webinar today about creativity in the aging population. As you know, the Irish government's Creative Ireland programme and TILDA, the Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging, have been cooperating in recent years to explore the effect that involvement in creative activity has on the over 50s, on their physical and their mental well-being. So when a report last year indicated the benefits of creative involvement, Creative Ireland and TILDA decided that they would delve deeper with a follow-up report, and that's what we're talking about today. It's important work because it informs policymakers, and it also, I suppose, educates all of us in knowing about the good that comes from creative involvement. So over the next hour, we're going to have 3 speakers for you, and afterwards we'll take questions if you want to put them into the chat box. Our first speaker today is Professor Roseanne Kenny, Regius Professor of Physic Medicine, and she holds the chair of Medical Gerontology in Trinity College, Dublin. She's the founding principal investigator of the Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging, TILDA. She's also director of the Mercer's Institute for Successful Aging in St. James's Hospital, Dublin, where she's also director of the Falls and Syncope Unit. Her recently published book, Age Proof: The New Science of Living a Longer and Healthier Life, was shortlisted for the Royal Society Science Prize 2022. Professor Roseanne Kenny.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Olivia. I'm going to share screen now. Great. So welcome everyone, and it's wonderful to have the opportunity to share with you our work in collaboration with Creative Ireland on creative activity in aging populations. And Olivia has very nicely set the scene for why we're having today's launch. It's very much in the spirit of what the TILDA study is, a longitudinal study. So we've already done one wave which incorporated creativity, and that raised a number of potential areas of interest that we wanted to have a deeper dive into. And because it's longitudinal, so we're going back to the same people at regular intervals, we therefore repeated questions around creativity, but much more creative questions and deeper questions for this wave. And that's what we're presenting to you today. I want to acknowledge our team here in TILDA who prepared the research on this report and the report itself. Now, before I start into the results from the Creative Life collaboration itself, I want to share with you the following, which is a poetry book called Bridging the Distance, Poetry and Prose. And the person I'm showing you is Mary Caulfield. And Mary, at the beginning of the book, describes her roots in North Mayo. She studied in Galway, a teacher. On retirement, availed of the opportunity to pursue interests in gardening, history, archaeology. But creative writing wasn't on her radar. However, after the last report, she read the report on creativity and aging from TILDA. In her book, she cites the fact that she is a participant in the TILDA study, and she quotes that creativity gives life form to your imagination, which is some of the response, free text response that we had from participants. And therefore, as a volunteer in the study, she understood the depth of the research in the study and the impact of the original output from the association between creativity and aging, and was therefore interested in exploring the fact further that older adults who participate in creative activities enjoy a higher quality of life and are less likely to be lonely, depressed, and stressed than their contemporaries who do not. So thank you to Mary for sharing this with us. I think it's a great example of an individual's experience of a national research study. A little bit about TILDA. The D in TILDA is for longitudinal, and there's a lot of history behind why that is. And just to let you know how representative the data set is, the participant data set, we in 2009 had to come up with a sample in order to deliver the study of 8,500 people. But it had to be nationally representative, and that was very challenging. So that meant of people 50 and older, we had to get the same percentage of people into the study, of which there were demographically in the population at that time, that number. For example, 68% of our sample at wave 1 were aged 50 to 64. So that was exactly the reflection of the number of people within that age bracket, or the proportion of people within that age bracket in Ireland as a whole, and so on, so forth, for the different age decades. So we used a random sampling methodology in collaboration with ESRI, so randomly picked addresses throughout Ireland. Then we clustered those addresses and identified overall nearly 26,000 addresses, randomly chosen. Knocked on the doors of those 26,000 houses, asked, does anybody aged 50 or more live here? And if so, would you please take part in a longitudinal study on aging, where we will visit you every 2 years, maybe for 10 years, and possibly longer. And the remarkable Irish population said yes, in that 62%. A massive response rate for that sort of an approach, agreed to take part in the study. So we have 8,500 participants, and after 4 years of piloting and working out the best way of running this sort of study in Ireland, we went into the field in 2009. We measure lots of different things in TILDA, and because of that, genes, nutrition, family network, social participation, and today creativity, which is what we're about, education, household structure, marital status, work and retirement, and longitudinally, then you can understand someone's experience aged 50, coming into 60, 65, what it's like to retire, post-retirement, etc. That's the value of longitudinal understanding process. Mental health and health generally. And the data is used to inform policy, which is very much what today is about, but also individuals, from Mary Caulfield's experience, to inform novel research. And we've published over 600 papers from the study. And comparability, we've developed the core of the data collection in all of these different bubbles you see, so that it matches what are now 26 sister studies worldwide with whom we're engaged. So for the creativity research component, what we wanted to understand was who is participating in creativity, what is the association between participation in creativity and physical, mental, behavioral health and quality of life, and both looking at that cross-sectionally, and because we had wave 1, we were able to look at the difference between wave 1 and wave 2, therefore longitudinally. And what were the creative activities? What motivated participation in creative activities? And what were the barriers to participation? Now, prepared all of that, great excitement, had everybody ready to rock into the field. First week in March, health assessment nurses, 17 of them trained up, etc., on site here. And our then Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, announced lockdown, if you remember, around the 17th of March. So this study took place March 2021 to January 2022. And what we did, we had the coronavirus in the interim, so that will have influenced some of the output from the study. But what we were able to sorry, that's the wave 1, the interpretation of the wave 1. This is the wave 2 of the study. But what we've been able to do is we formed telephone, interviews and self-completion interviews, and were able to complete the whole of the study. The questions we asked was, do you participate in any arts, creative or cultural activities? If you stated you never or previously participated, what were your reasons for not participating? If you currently participate, what kind of participation is this? Which of the arts, creative or cultural activities do you participate in? How often do you participate? And where do you participate in the different activities? And within that, we also included private home, but theatre, hotel, museum, heritage site, online, community centre, cinema, library, gallery. If you do not currently participate, would you if you were resourced to do so? Because Creative Life were obviously interested in trying to identify potentials for further development that might assist in participation, materials, equipment, training. Who do you participate with on your own or as part of an organized group or with family or friends or casual? And how important are each of the following items in motivating you to participate? Enjoyment, fun, social, discover to learn a new skill, autonomy, interest in the activity, passion, a venue, word of mouth, having a routine structured activity to engage in, or employment opportunities. And during which periods in your life have you participated in the arts? When you were young adult, midlife, or older adult? Now, I'm going to summarize the key findings, and then I've pulled a couple of figures just to emphasize some of them. Women were more likely to participate than men. That's who is participating. And 62% of women, current or past participants compared to 46% of men. So potentially an opportunity for our creative partners with respect to developing access there. Higher education was associated with participation. So the lower socioeconomic classes are less likely to participate. Older adults with third level education were in fact 5 times more likely to participate compared to those with primary level education. So big challenge here, how do we actually engage out with these particular cohorts? Highest in Dublin City, and I'm going to show you how that's disaggregated into counties in a moment. Lowest in Kerry, Cavan, Monaghan, Westmeath, and my own dear Mayo didn't fare too well either. Participation in arts, creative and cultural activities associated with higher quality of life. This is the good news. And lower levels of depression, stress, worry and loneliness. And I can tell you that during COVID, loneliness went up 3-fold. So we measured loneliness and depression before COVID, obviously with one of the waves. We did a COVID wave during COVID, and then we measured afterwards. And depression was 3-fold higher during COVID. And unfortunately, after COVID, had not returned to baseline levels, was halfway between a peak and where it was at baseline. And likewise, loneliness. So this is something that we can do to counteract that, potentially. Older adults who have previously participated, but no longer do so, had lower levels of quality of life and higher levels of depression and loneliness compared to those who currently participate. So it's not just people who never participated, but even people who participated previously and weren't now were faring worse. Lower quality of life and higher stress and worry compared to those who currently participate. That's the group who never participated. And long-term associations between higher quality of life and participation. That's the longitudinal component. So if you continue in creativity, the benefits in terms of quality of life are maintained, which is what we'd shown in the first wave, benefit and quality of life. The most popular types was listening to or playing or teaching music, with 52% engaging in this activity. And the strongest motivation for participation was interest in the activity, followed by enjoyment and fun. And then next in rank was social aspects and the benefits from the creativity. The most frequent location for participation was a private home, and the next was community centres. Now, just a couple of graphs before I finish off. Participation companions in arts, creativity, and cultural activity by gender. Really, you can see the female are blue, that on your own, it's more likely for male. With family and friends, more likely with women. And as part of an organized group, more likely with women. The counties. So best of all is Dublin County, Dublin City, Meath, Louth, Wexford, Clare, dripping down here to the last four. Mayo, Carlow, Kilkenny, Laois and Offaly were all around the same. Participation, Kerry also relatively low, and Cavan, Monaghan and Westmeath. That's relative to the higher participation on the East Coast, with the exception of Clare. And the proportion who report there were no activities in their area, very few in Dublin, another city or town outside of Dublin, and then rural areas, 24%. So possibly we need to focus more on rural areas with respect to activities. And the frequency of participation, how frequent? Most people were daily or once a week. That was 66% of the cohort. So if it's done frequently. Participation across the life course, 17% had done it up to 14 years, 50% 15 to 24 years, 63% 25 to 44 years. That's of those who participated at any stage. 77% 45 to 64 years, and 75% 65 and older. So it's more likely as people get older that they will participate in creative activities. Regression showing, okay, so all you need to know about this is the ones with stars are significant. And I'm just showing you here that no, I have never participated. Poor quality of life, minus sign. Stress and worry. That's significant when we apply statistics independent of all of the other bubbles that I showed you in the bubble chart that might influence stress or worry or quality of life independently. Never having participated in creativity impacts. And likewise, but I have previously participated. They even fare worse, significant across all of the domains of quality of life, loneliness, depression, stress, and worry, with negative quality of life impact. In other words, lower quality of life and higher levels of depression, higher levels of loneliness, higher levels of stress, and higher levels of worry, significant and independent of anything else which might influence those. So we concluded that a quarter of older adults currently participate. Women are more likely. Those with second and third level education are more likely. Those over 70 are more likely. People living outside Dublin City and County are less likely to participate. And interest in the activity, availability and time constraints were some of the main barriers to participation. And of those who never participated, 56% reported lack of interest compared to 15% of those who had previously participated. So in other words, people who had never participated, over half of them said, I'm not interested. But people who had previously participated understood the value. Of those living in rural areas, 24% cite nothing available in my area as a barrier compared to those in Dublin and other towns or cities. And participation is associated with better quality of life, lower levels of stress. Those who have previously participated had higher levels of depression and loneliness and poorer self-rated health now when they weren't participating. And the longitudinal design enabled us to look long-term at health and quality and show that quality of life and psychological health, I didn't share everything with you, all of the graphs, but quality of life and psychological health were better longitudinally in those who participated consistently. And I was delighted to be able to share at the Hay Festival, where I gave a talk during the week, the output from some of the work in Ireland in the context of creativity. So thank you very much, and thank you to Creative Ireland for funding this portion of the study and for shining a light on how on an important aspect of how we can improve quality of life and make Ireland the best place in the world to grow old. Thank you. I've stopped sharing now.
Thank you, Roseanne. And we will continue with our next speaker responding to Roseanne Kenny, who is Rebecca Minch. Rebecca has recently joined the Creative Ireland team from the Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications. And in her previous civil service jobs, she worked on schemes to combat energy poverty, particularly among older people. Before that, she worked as an art historian, lecturing in a number of third-level institutions, including the National College of Art and Design and University College Dublin. Rebecca Minch.
Thanks very much, Olivia. And just on behalf of Creative Ireland, welcome to the speakers today. It really is such an important that we can come together and look at these findings together and work together and how we take them forward. Excuse me, and also just to welcome to everybody who's joined our webinar today. So I just want to respond giving the perspective of the policymaker. Now, of course, I'm new to Creative Ireland, but I'm really struck by how I'm finding how much is resonating and chiming with my experience working previously across the public sector in areas that, as Olivia says, include areas such as energy poverty. But look, I'm sure there's a good understanding among our audience today of Creative Ireland, so I won't go into detail as to what we do, but I'm sure you're very well aware that supporting older people to engage in creative activity is an absolutely key part of the mission of Creative Ireland. And indeed, since 2020, we've invested 2.5 million in that strand, and we're allocating 600,000 this year. So it's a really, really important part of what we do. But of course, it's not just a question of what Creative Ireland can do. I mean, this TILDA report is so important, I think, for how it sets out the challenge, but also the opportunity that we all must rise to across government and across our cultural institutions to reap the benefits that we're seeing are potentially there with the findings of the TILDA report. So as a policymaker responding to these findings today, I'm asking myself, what can we do better? What can we do differently? But also how we can do that collectively, because that's really important. This is about an holistic approach. When you look at the barriers identified by the TILDA work, there is no one entity that can address all of these. So an interdisciplinary holistic approach is absolutely essential. And I think we need to remember that every policy challenge is also an opportunity to design our services better. So that's very much where we would be coming from. And of course, we also have to remember that this is against the backdrop of the census results that have just been released, that showing the proportion of our population made up of older people is increasing. But just to pick out some of the particular findings there that Roseanne has taken us through, I mean, participation rates is something that definitely we've picked up on from the policy perspective. I mean, it's very interesting that 26% of older people, we're asking ourselves, now this seems to be very low. Is this something that we need to focus on to increase? You know, there's been a big increase in state funding for cultural activity over recent years. You know, do we need to unpack a bit more the impact of COVID? I think Roseanne has spoken very compellingly about that, the impact of COVID on these findings, But what is the underlying trend here? I think that's something that we'll be very much focusing on, looking to understand better. Also too, when it comes to gender, I mean, that's such a strong a finding that really stands out so clearly, with 62% of women reporting participation is against 46% of men. There's definitely, I think, something we need to, that needs to be addressed there around access to creative activity, as is the case with educational attainment as well, and indeed what a rural-urban divide. But maybe, I think the other thing we need to remember is it's not necessarily just a trend appearing in older age. When one looks at the findings of growing up in Ireland in terms of gender and education and attainment, there's a trend there. The other thing I'm very struck by is what Roseanne was saying there about the low interest among people who had never previously participated. So it's again to actually for us to zoom that bit further back out and understand the trends we're seeing here in an even bigger picture. The other thing that struck me very much is the question of location and the importance of people's own homes and community centres, because obviously there's an awful lot of focus on developing art centres. Are they featuring as they should be in this dynamic here? But having said that, I think we do need to be very cognizant of the importance of location to people in terms of how we design citizen-led approaches, and that approaches that really speak to the needs of the individuals we want to reach out to. And look, based on my previous experience that I've mentioned, none of these issues are easily addressed, and that's the challenge we have as policymakers. But I can definitely say we're not alone in the cultural sector in the challenges that we are facing in trying to support those that are harder to reach and that are currently unserved. But look, as I've said, every challenge is an opportunity to design our services better, and there are real gains to be had for the individuals themselves and for the public bodies that must provide services to them. Look, it's so striking, the clear link between creativity and the benefits for psychological health. And I think it's so, it must be, I'm almost certain that just about everybody in this call today has been, touched by this correlation between depression, loneliness in terms of psychological health, but also the correlation between that and declining physical health. That's all touched us in some way in terms of the older people that we know and love. And I think the implications in the longer term of COVID for this, and what Roseanne says about the opportunity we have with access to creativity to counteract this, is so important. So look, to that end, I think one principle that's absolutely essential to future policy making here is collaboration and partnership. And I think that's really exemplified by the cooperation here between TILDA and Creative Ireland. But it's also so important that we listen to people. This isn't a top-down process either. And to that end, one thing that really stood out strongly for me here is how important a motivating factor is sense of purpose and confidence in all of this. And I think a key thing we need to focus on as policymakers is how do we support people to find that sense of purpose. I think that really needs to be one of our guiding principles as we strive to continuously improve our offering, the way that speaks to individuals and their needs. It's really important. And I think that in turn points to the really symbiotic relationship there is between the work of TILDA on the national level and the partners that we fund and work with on the ground at the local level. And that was a very fruitful dialogue we've had with TILDA actually in terms of how we take this forward. And it's this access to the lived experience, how we can layer that on to what we're learning from TILDA, the lived experience of the people that we're seeking to reach through the teams that they know and trust in their community, that is really invaluable. So I think I'll leave it there, Olivia, and hopefully that will lead on to Catherine's intervention. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. And I think what's coming through both from you and from Roseanne are things that we'd all be conscious of ourselves. I spend a lot of time down the country, and of course the big problem is getting anywhere. Local transport down the country there's a big problem there. There are lots of things people in rural areas are fascinated by, particularly their own history, archaeology. You know, you'll find a real interest and an involvement in those sort of issues. But the big thing is, how do you get there? And when you're older, have you access to a car or whatever? And that's the local on the ground link that we may be able to hear about now from Catherine McGuigan, because Catherine is the Chief Officer of the National Age Friendly Ireland programme. It's a shared service. It's hosted by Meath County Council, but it's operational across all 31 local authorities in Ireland. The service is based on the World Health Organization's Global Age Friendly programme, and it's focused on ensuring that Ireland is responsive to the increasing needs of older people. And as we know from the census, we are becoming an older population, and it also looks at adopting effective local policy approaches to respond to demographic aging. So Catherine McGuigan.
Thank you, Olivia. Very much appreciate that glowing introduction. I'm just going to share my PowerPoint. Sorry, I thought that Moira was actually doing it, so if you can just bear with me for 1 second. And can I ask, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
That's perfect. So thank you very much, Olivia, for that warm introduction. And I know that we're sticking to time, so I'll stay within the 10 minutes. And yes, I suppose the Age Friendly Ireland programme has been through a number of iterations since we started back in 2008, but is now a shared service, one of 39 shared services, a function under local government under the 2014 reform programme. So a very structured public service delivery mechanism. And I suppose in key achievements and milestones in the last 6 years has been getting into programme for government, so that we actually have, this government does have a vision of an age-friendly Ireland, and also been designated the first official age-friendly country in the world by the WHO in terms of the structures. I'm not going to labour on this slide, but this just shows the level, I suppose, of support that there is at national level for the Age Friendly Ireland programme, and by virtue of that, all the partners and agencies across the country that are delivering services for older people. When we partnered with Create, when you hear Roseanne talking about what's important and where the gaps are, and then Rebecca talking about what can we learn and work in partnership, and we actually worked last year in partnership with Creative Ireland with a bit of modest seed funding to actually look at some initiatives that would be co-designed, and I'll talk about the principles. But one of our key structures is across the country we have 31 older people's councils, which are a diverse representation of older people in each of the local authority areas. So as we know, older people are not an homogenous group. So it's really important that we have younger older people, older people, people with complex conditions, active at different levels of income, abilities, and I suppose people from ethnic minorities, people living in residential care. We have a really, really good mix and a good representation. And I suppose that gives kind of you know, an input into our consultation and how we co-design things to make sure that we're just not responding to one cohort of older people. And the initiatives that we set out to deliver with Creative Ireland, and we've been delighted to say that Tanya, representing the department, is on our national advisory group. But we wanted to see how the implementation and the structures at local level could support that delivery. So we said that we would have 4 key objectives within it, that we'd support the health and well-being through creativity, and that we would reach those really underserved groups, you know, particularly maybe the males that maybe don't participate, because we've certainly found that, and as part of the outcomes of COVID, we certainly talked about that under engagement and re-engagement, that we wanted a co-design approach. So the perceptions of what is creativity and what are people's understanding, and maybe are some people think, well, it's just the traditional things like music and art and painting. We wanted them to understand or maybe co-design what their impression of creativity meant, particularly some of the things that they had learned during COVID. And then we also had a sustainability element. We didn't want to just start something and say that was great and produce this lovely report that we're going to launch mid-year and say, well, that's it. We wanted to be able to work with our partners and our, I suppose, programme managers in local government to ensure that these initiatives were successful, could be sustained and repeated. So I'm just going to use the next few minutes just to give you an overview of what they were. That was across the region, and it was interesting. Roseanne was talking about participation across the counties. Ours was slightly different because we went to targeted groups. If you look at Dublin City, it was a smaller cohort, but it was a very intensive train the trainer. And there was a cap on numbers because we want those older people now to go out and actually train others and share the learning. So there was huge volumes and huge volumes of interest, but we actually capped the participation to ensure that we had that wider reach. And you'll see in the eastern region, which is Fingal and Louth and Meath, the way our regions are broken up, they had some outdoor events which were safer, obviously, for some people who maybe had reservations after COVID, and we had huge participation there. So one of the case studies was the adapted Ceilidh in the Dublin City region. So 30 older people were trained to become dance leaders, and we provided the resources. We also did the video resource of the Irish dances so people could look at it at home. And it was interesting you were saying about the locations, because a lot of locations that were suggested by older people were the non-traditional cultural institutions, more like the community centres, the libraries and things like that. They also did a beautiful instructional handbook and produced that as well for the train. So almost like a set of a module and a set of guidelines to deliver it to the bigger groups. And the consultation included a huge amount of story exchange, and now it's going to be scaled and replicated. So I suppose there were some of the outcomes from us. You know, they're literally going to facilitate scale and growth in this, and also working with the program manager at local level. The seed funding can be, you know, used within, I suppose, the core budget now to run these out. At the minute, there's 3 clubs that are still that are established in Glasnevin and Cabra, running weekly, and also intergenerationally, and they want to set up another 3. So that is going to really increase the amount of those year on year, the older people having the opportunity to go in and do the adapted Ceilidh dance. And it's also the nuances, their input and their design of it. And it was the Munster Academy of Dance that actually participated with them and encouraged them and provided the initial training to show them how to do that. Very quickly, and I know we're tight on time, here's the other regions. They did songwriting in the Western region, which was a travelling roadshow of music and songwriting. And it was led by a professional musician that engaged the older people and helped them to songwrite. An exploration of proverbs as well was a key part of it. Now, you might sort of say, well, some of these are rolling out before, or they're like the traditional ones, and that's fine. But if that's what older people said they wanted to do, that's how the projects were rolled out. We listened to them and let it roll out. And if it was replicated or if it was totally innovative, that didn't matter. In the northern region, they really wanted to explore St. Bridget. So they did poetry and straw workshops. They did a modern day pageant, exploring the history and the culture associated with St. Bridget. And they did a big celebratory day outside, as you can see, some beautiful photographs there of the participating in it. And again, that's one that they want to do year on year around St. Bridget's Day. There was 47 in that. In the Midlands, they wanted to do a music teaching residency. And it actually got older people who were maybe lapsed musicians. And interestingly, Roseanne, in terms of what we were talking earlier about people breaking habits and cycles, this was a lovely one that took people back in and get them back involved in maybe something that they did in their more active years. And there were 62 in that. And again, there was a nice intergenerational element where you can upcycle the actual instruments and teach younger children. The Midlands one had 80, or the South Eastern region had 87 participants, and again, designed specifically for what older people wanted. And then we had the massive one in the Eastern region with 560 participants. And if you again look at non-traditional venues, heritage parks, public parks, all of those outside that were able to be celebrated. And I suppose they called it the autumn medley of creativity. It didn't have to be the good weather for them to have it outside. Very briefly, just in terms of what we took from the evaluation, how the 6 initiatives across the country were felt by older people. It increased physical activity, 33%. It increased social connections by 85%, which is a really, really important one. It increased the feelings of happiness by 58% and confidence by 62%. And the establishment of these new creative groups, the participation of older people in the ongoing creativity, allowed for the enhancement of relationships at local level between the creative partners. So there was also a dividend for the people who were running these, and an economic dividend for some of those maybe smaller organizations that were looking to roll out their sessions and their workshops. And I suppose it allowed the older people from rural areas and those who didn't previously engage to actually come in and do something. And most importantly, it stimulated the demand for co-design approach. And that's the approach that we really use for everything. I'm going to skip this one, Olivia. This slide is really just about the alignments of plans. And if I had time, I was going to talk about how it spoke to all the health and well-being outcomes from all the government policies. But for the purposes of keeping time, I'm going to stop there. I am happy to take questions, but also we're very happy to share the presentation afterwards, Olivia, and give more detail within those slides.
Okay, Catherine, can I put a question to you before, because I know you may be under time pressure. You know better than most about the transport difficulties in particular areas that might stop people participating. I mean, what's the block there?
Well, I suppose over the last 13 years, through different times and different policies, transport remains and will always be an issue for older people until we get it sorted. And if you look at some of like European kind of champions like Copenhagen, where they have people in their 70s and 80s who are cycling trio bikes and different things like that, sometimes the infrastructure, but how do we manage the infrastructure? And the one thing I will say, Olivia, is we've made vast improvements. So for rural areas, for example, our program manager, when they're trying to get people to participate in activities, will always make sure that transportation is included, not just in a yearly event, but a weekly event and everything. You've natural resources like community buses on Garda Síochána, but we also have the local links, which are funded centrally by the NTA. And it's really important that older people participate in route planning. And that's the critical part that an age-friendly alliance does. If older people have specific issues, they need to be working with their older people's councils and say, look, at our whole area is underserved. And then the funding application is made for that to be served. There are other issues, Olivia, like with national transportation and bus éireann. We work very closely with NTA bus éireann to make sure that they're served, that we get real-time information. What about those that are not digitally connected? But I suppose the overarching thing is we deal with solutions or with problems as they come in, bring them to the statutory agencies and try to get a response. But we are definitely further on, because if people don't have the barrier or don't have the access, they simply won't participate. And transport goes across all of that.
It does. So you try to build transport into whatever cultural offering you're making.
Or any delivery of any program, of anything that they're doing, transport is critical. Because when older people used to say in 2009, I'd go to everything if I knew about it and I could get to it. So that's communications and transport, two of the critical enablers to participation.
Okay. And in terms, I might just put a point to Roseanne, in terms of the finding, Roseanne, of the loneliness that people felt during the COVID period. That obviously continues. That's a long COVID issue, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I call this the invisible or the hidden long COVID. We know an awful lot about the symptoms associated with protracted infection. But this is not people necessarily who've been infected with COVID. This is at a population level, at a societal level, the hangover effect of social isolation. And I guess at sometimes extreme fear experienced and anxiety about the unknown experienced during that whole COVID period. And when we looked, Olivia, just to repeat again, at the pre, during and post-COVID levels of depression and loneliness, there hadn't been a return to normal, which one would have anticipated. A significant change in those levels. You know, I mean, it's not just almost a baseline, not at all. So this is something that I don't think is out there. I don't think there's an awareness. We have reported this through scientific publications in TILDA, but I think we need to start realizing this from a media and a policy perspective and building this awareness into any initiatives.
Because we're hearing the odd message and advertising on radio about people getting back out there. but maybe it has to be done on a much bigger level. I mean, I was just thinking the time it takes children to get used to the notion of socialization when they're little. And it's almost as though during that COVID period, maybe we unlearned all of those lessons.
I really like that analogy, and I think that will chime with people. People will identify with what you've just said, and I, in this context, I would say we all need to reach out, because I think confidence has been lost and self-esteem during the whole COVID process. And we've ways of looking at this in TILDA, which we're currently exploring, trying to understand what it is that has been a barrier to returning to activities and to still retaining loneliness and mood changes. And if we all reach out, you know, there's no doubt that by doing so, you will impact on others and have a better outcome for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that in some of the slides that Catherine was showing, some of the ones that really worked were the pictures of people learning the guitar, the pictures of people dancing, you know, and particularly for an older population, we all learned to dance. You know, we went to lessons and we went to waltz and to foxtrot and to do all the rest of it. And now it's no use because nobody wants to do that anymore. And there's a sort of an untapped source there of an ability to dance and a skill to dance that maybe isn't called on often enough. Catherine, just going back to you again, the question of whether the word creativity frightens people, that they feel, oh God, this is going to be something highfalutin, not something that I can do or feel involved in. Now, you obviously tried to address that, as you say, by co-designing some of the programs. So what did you find were the things that put people off, and what were the sort of things that they said, yeah, no, I'd like to do that?
I wonder, you see, I suppose it's your understanding of creativity and culture. And Roseanne came out with very good specifics there. Like if you look at the 5 times for people who have a 3rd level education against, you know, somebody with primary level or secondary level. And, you know, the thing about it is with those with not the high level of educational educational attainment, do they think, well, I'll not go to that because, you know, I wouldn't be good enough for that or wouldn't be smart enough for that. If it's music or if it's painting, if it's poetry reading, or if it's writing, creative writing. So there's an element of that we need to sort of say to people, creativity is anything. Creativity is going into making scones with your grandchild. Do you know what I mean? Creativity, anything that produces, if you're doing, you know, a little sort of herb garden with your partner or your children, that's creativity. So we have to sort of, I suppose, widen our understanding. But what we talked to older people as well as about was, there's that non-traditional, is it just for a certain cohort? Also, very real what Roseanne said. Well, I want to be able to get to it. And if I start it, I want to be able to continue going. And I'm not driving at the minute because I'm just post-operative after my hip operation. And, you know, so we actually held them when it suited people. Is it evening? Is it morning? Do you know, is it pension day? Whatever. And I think as well, what's really important is we have to be aware of the high levels of not just digital illiteracy in this country, which has improved in COVID, but basic literacy. So you don't need to come in and fill in forms and somebody's there to help you if you want to do that. So what we have to do is we have to, and we allowed them, that's why when they designed it, they said, you tell us. So if it's out making straw St. Bridget crosses, sitting out on a harvest evening and lighting a fire, that's culture and that's creativity. And that's what, and Mary McAleese used to talk about the nag and drag. Roseanne will remember that. If somebody didn't want to go, somebody would bring them along and nag them and drag them until they had the confidence to go themselves. And we really need to go back to that, particularly post-COVID. Bring your friend along, tell other people and encourage them to participate, because they might want to, they just mightn't want to do it on their own.
Well, there's an interesting question that's come in here talking about how we need to find out about neurodivergent adults as they age and how important creativity is for them. And the questioner says we see a significant gap here to fill reaching aging neurodivergent people who now get diagnosed maybe in their late 40s and 50s. And we can see people coming into groups in their 60s and 70s, late being identified and diagnosed. What do you think we can do for that? Rebecca, do you have anything to say about that? Have we lost Rebecca?
I'm very struck by that intervention. And I think that's where the collaborative piece comes in, and the important partnerships that we built with the HSE, with Healthy Ireland. That's definitely something I'm going to be taking away to talk with them. I think that's, and interestingly, this is also a really important issue that's been raised with regard to our new Nurture Fund, which is aimed at younger people. So again, it really makes me think of the hope. This is something we need to look at as a part of the whole life journey. So yes, I think it's really important. It's very important that we do design offerings specifically. So it's for us to engage and better understand. Yeah.
Olivia, I'm not sure if you can see, but there are two people with their hands up there.
I indeed, I can see Mary Harkin. Mary, I'm sorry. Do you wanted to ask a question?
Thanks, Olivia. It's a bit picking up on Catherine's point there, and I wanted to know if there was a correlation between membership of a group, membership of a social group, active retirement, ICA, men's sheds, and participation. Because we did a piece of research in Age and Opportunity just after COVID with groups, and we had 700 responses from groups, and it was very kind of stark reading at the time that a lot of the groups had fallen apart, but the men's groups particularly fared badly. The very smaller groups, maybe some of the smaller ICA groups in rural areas, had really fallen apart, and they had reported that pre-COVID the group would have been a really very important part of people's lives. They would have met week on week. It would have been really a key part of their social lives. And post-COVID. And one of the things that just resonated when Catherine was speaking was that piece about some of the respondents reported that they might have spent years trying to get some man to come down to the men's shed, by hook or by crook, asking him to, saying that he was needed there, and once they really feared that now, having lost those people that were kind of hard to reach and had taken a bit of hooking in, that it would be very hard to get them back again. So just wanted to know, would that have caused, would the creativity, would those groups have been very important in terms of participation and creativity for people? And have we, is that something we've got to get back? Supporting the groups, would that be a good policy piece?
Yeah. Roseanne, did you want to say something about that? And then I'll go to Pauline Harley.
I support that. As I'm listening to people, and this was touched on by Catherine, I think, purpose is terribly important in our lives for us as animals. And as we've evolved, we need a purpose. And very often people, particularly post-retirement, etc., feel they lose purpose. Now, we can create purpose. And it occurs to me that two of the ways that purpose can be created in a very productive way are creativity and volunteering. And there's already an awful lot of that delivered by older persons or post-retirement persons in Ireland. But I think we might need to frame some of the language around it, and creating a purpose might be one way that we would explore it, because there's a lot of science behind how that is good for reducing inflammation.
There is, and language is important. Pauline Harley, you wanted to come in. Or have we lost Pauline? Maybe we have.
Sorry,
Barbara.
no, apologies. Oh, sorry, apologies, Olivia.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was the person you put into the chat about the neurodivergent kind of autistic aging space and creativity. Having recently project managed an adult support and wellbeing program for autistic adults here in Ireland on behalf of one of the national charities. And I was just wondering, going forward with TILDA, if there is any insight into the numbers of people who were possibly neurodivergent in those studies, or is there an intention going forward to actually do a longitudinal study of neurodivergent aging people in this space? It's just something we're really focused on at the moment, I suppose, in my own consultancy work and stuff, because we are inevitably seeing 60 and 70-year-olds, not necessarily some with co-occurring conditions, some obviously with not intellectual disabilities, but just seeing the value of creative peer support in that space as they age, to manage mental health challenges and loneliness. It's really important. It's just the data is so exciting to think of it coming forward, I suppose.
So just to say, we can ask, have you a diagnosis? We've been discussing this with our psychology colleagues here in Trinity and in Cork. It's actually quite difficult to make the diagnosis. Not difficult, but it takes time. So it would have to be a very special focus. But we are reflecting on neurodivergence and ways that we can possibly incorporate some work around that into the study. And there are no plans at the moment to a specific cohort, specific neurodivergent longitudinal study. Great idea, though.
Thank you.
Barbara Ann Harkin from IMA, you wanted to say something.
Thank you. Just on the importance of language that we just were speaking about there, I think that this has been a huge piece of learning that we in IMA have had over the last couple of years, that art and aging was alienating many people that would otherwise have perhaps accessed and participated in our programming and also accessed our resources, particularly during COVID, actually, video resources and printed resources that we were creating with the help of Creative Ireland. And so that's what kind of drove us to rebranding that IMA Horizons, Lifelong Creativity for the Curious, because I think rather than boxing a program or an experience off for older people, it's much more expansive. We will be programming things at times that suit older people at a pace that's enabling of older people who have different kind of capacities for doing different things. But I think I hope the strength of this will be that we won't alienate those people who didn't like that terminology, art and aging. So I just think that question of language is hugely important, and this afternoon has been really useful.
Barbara Ann, I don't know whether it was you or somebody else who suggested that it was a very good idea to bring people on sample visits, perhaps to galleries and other places, so that they can actually try it out and see whether it's for them and become familiar with the surroundings and therefore not be maybe overwhelmed by the experience. And that sounded like a great idea.
There's somebody on the call who can speak to that. We have Helen here from Clare County Council, who's been running the Companions programme from some time. Haven't you, Helen?
Hello, Helen. Have we got Helen? I don't think we have. Which is,
Helen,
I just
thought put a message in the chat. She had to leave.
That you had to leave.
Yeah.
Well, I just thought it was a great idea to let people sample things in a way that they won't be overwhelmed. And Catherine, I know that you have to go now, so thank you very much. And I might just go back for
thank you. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
A last comment both to Rebecca and to Roseanne. Rebecca, interesting ideas coming in there about how to go about it, maybe allowing people to sample stuff so they don't get overwhelmed, allowing them, as Catherine says, to co-design programs. Is it possible to do that?
I think so, because look, we're already seeing that co-design piece there is already working on the ground through the work of projects such as Catherine. So that is so important. And again, it resonates with other approaches that are being taken across Creative Ireland. And I think this is coming back to what I was saying earlier. It's not necessarily a top-down process. It's about working with people and hearing what they want to say and taking a very consultative approach. So I would very much agree that the co-design, the co-creation is absolutely central to this. And I think things like sample visits, it's the simple stuff, that comes back to the practical realities, like transport, like, well, I've never been in that building before, or if I went in there, would I get lost, or are there steps? How do I manage them? All that kind of, we need to really think of the individual journey here, the individual experience. So important. Yeah.
Okay. And Roseanne, just a final comment.
Olivia. Thank you. I think that let's reflect on language. And we know from a lot of research, if you're 75, if I'm 75, and I perceive myself to be 50. probably 45. I am not going to join an arts and aging group. So I love Emma's approach to this. I like the lifelong approach. And I just want to say that in TILDA, in MISA, Mercer's Institute, where a number of you were last week, we've worked with the Arts Council to actually showcase some of their art collection, because there's a huge footfall there in St. James's of people who may never be exposed to art otherwise. So let's think outside the box in terms of exposure and opportunity.
Yeah, and just a last comment to you. I think one of the most important things that TILDA has done is it's actually gone and asked older people what they think. I don't think anybody did that before. So well done. Okay, guys, thanks to our speakers and thanks to everybody who tuned in. And as we know, this week's census figures told us that we have to plan for an aging population. But, you know, it struck me, what if that new age we're moving into could be a new age rather than just old age, and one where we can discover through the development of our creative side all sorts of bits of ourselves that will keep us active and engaged and strong. The late Garrett Fitzgerald used to say, I'm going to live forever till I die. And that sounds like a very good plan to me. Goodbye.
Thank you.